Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to this webinar on circadian lighting and LED lighting. I'm very, very excited about the topic. We're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping here, and I'll talk to you about kind of how this is going to go, and then I'll do a little bit of introduction, and I'll turn it over to Jack Sterne and Dr. Kevin O'Neill. So we'll go about 45 minutes, which will leave us some time for questions. We will be recording the webinar, so it will be available. There'll be an email that will come out to you likely tomorrow that will give you a link to where the webinar recording is and a link to the slides. If you have questions and you just want to communicate with us, there are a couple things you can do. If you move your cursor all the way down to the bottom, you'll see a little box that says Q&A, and that's the best place to put questions in. And we will either respond to that by typing an answer in there, or we will answer it on air and let you know that. Mostly we'll hold questions until the end, but there may be some that we'll field, so feel free to put your questions in there anytime that you would like. The last thing is you can see you've got all these talking heads over here, and you have a bunch of options in terms of shrinking those, making those go, move them around the screen, and so just put them wherever is most comfortable for you as we go through this. So let's go to the next slide, Jack. So I'm a big fan of technology. I have spent thousands of dollars on technology that's now junked. And we know that technology always goes through this progression, and it starts pretty primitive and it gets more exciting. I've always loved LED lights. I went out and bought, probably spent $1,000 on LED lighting when it was $10 a bulb. And I did it because I was lazy and I just got tired of changing bulbs, and I was happy to not have to change bulbs. I sort of originally looked at LED lighting for senior living and circadian lighting and kind of really wondered whether or not it made a lot of sense. But we are now past that early adoption phase. We are now into a place where we know it works. We know the pricing is reasonable. We know it makes a huge difference. Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, circadian lighting is really just a way of saying lighting that looks like natural lighting. So night is really dark, and as the daytime comes, it slowly gets brighter and brighter, and then we come to the end of the day and it drops. And so the question is can you create that in a way that improves the lives of residents? We know, for instance, that with our cell phones, that they create this blue light, and that blue light will actually interrupt sleep. And so sort of two recommendations. Most modern cell phones have a setting that makes the blue light go away so that it doesn't have that impact. But even with that, most of the experts recommend that you stay off your phone, off screens for at least half an hour before you go to bed, because it gives you a better night's sleep. And so we do that for people, but it turns out that a lot of the lighting that's in senior living is really bad for residents, that it doesn't take that into account. So I first saw the system, first met Jack at Argentum earlier this year. They walked me through what it does. They had some equipment there. I looked at it, and I just thought this was such an amazing thing that they were doing. And so we're going to tell you the story about how it works, what the science is, what the medical evidence is that we're seeing. It's still anecdotal in the senior living space, but they're doing some research. And I think you'll learn some stuff, and this is really cool. So with that, Jack and Kevin, you're up.
Great, thanks, Steve. My name is Jack Sterne. I'm the president and co-founder of Lumenant. I'm a lawyer by training, but don't hold it against me. I'm a recovering lawyer now. I haven't sued anybody in a long time. I always say that feels good. I am an entrepreneur by nature. I can't stop starting new stuff. And I think our company Lumenant is probably the best thing I've created yet. I've got 30 years of energy and environment innovation experience. And we brought that together with my business partner, Steve Kopp, into remaking buildings and paying for it with the energy savings. So our mission at Lumenant is really to improve senior living buildings and improve their aesthetics, safety, and wellness. So my co-presenter is Dr. Kevin O'Neill. Kevin, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Jack and Steve. I'm really excited to be here with you to talk about circadian lighting and bright light therapy. I'm a big believer as a geriatrician in less is more, and not to say that drug therapy isn't, such an important aspect of what we do in geriatric care, but there are many non-pharmacologic interventions that have been shown to be very effective, even more effective than drug therapy in many situations, some of which we'll discuss today. I've been the Chief Medical Officer at Affinity Living Group since May of 2018. Previously, I had been the Chief Medical Officer at Brookdale for about 10 years, and then Chief Medical Officer for the Ascension Senior Living Group for a couple of years. So I'm really happy at Affinity that we really have an innovative approach to things. We've created innovation hubs in various markets so we can incubate innovative care models, and we found that the results that we've had with circadian lighting has been so extraordinary that we're happy to try to get the message out about the importance it can have in the healthcare of our older adults.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So just a couple more things about Lumenant. We, as I mentioned, we really specialize in senior living. We've done over 80 lighting projects to date in senior living buildings. Very early on, we realized that in order to operate in these buildings, because of the needs of the residents, that we needed to build our own crews and train them around a proprietary protocol that's really about protecting the residents and maintaining the integrity of day-to-day operations. While we do install lighting in new facilities from time to time, most of what we're doing at this point is retrofit work, and we're proud to say that we haven't had any incidents with residents, and we've gotten consistently great feedback from the staff of the buildings about how we're both interacting with the residents and with the staff too. So Steve mentioned a little bit about circadian lighting. So really what we're trying to do with circadian lighting is to create a natural cycle of day and night in the building, because as most of you know, your residents really don't get outside that much. And it's really important to health to be able to have those that natural cycle of day and night. By bringing that into the building, we think you're going to see a lot of health benefits. I know Kevin will speak to you shortly about things they're already seeing as a result of the first project that's been done. These lights are highly energy efficient, which makes them very cost effective, and a lot of times, depending upon the term, I think they will pay for themselves. And the other thing here is that it can really be a market differentiator. We all know how competitive the space is, and if you are going above and beyond by having this kind of lighting in your properties, people will notice that and they'll want to be a part of that. So, so our partner in this has been Affinity. They are one of the top 10 operators nationally. I think last I checked, they were up to either owning or managing 143 communities. Their CEO, Charlie Trefsker, is really committed to innovation and to care. His whole mission is his residents, as Kevin can attest, and I think, Kevin, you would say that's exactly why you came to Affinity, because of Charlie's commitment on both of those counts. So Kevin is our medical expert. Can you just talk to us about why we should care about circadian rhythm and what it is?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack. And as Jack mentioned, our CEO is really about innovation, things that are going to advance the ball in terms of care of our residents, promoting quality care. So very excited to be working with Affinity and being able to be flexible enough to incubate these innovations quickly and learn from them and sharing what we learn with others. So I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully other assisted living and senior living organizations can learn from our experience. But about circadian rhythm, I think you all know that we have a 24-hour biological rhythm that controls many of our physiologic functions. Other internal rhythms are what we call external time Zeitgebers. Zeitgebers are actually time cues. But the most powerful Zeitgeber is bright light. And we know that our sleep-wake cycle, we have during the day and at night is regulated by internal rhythms. For example, our core body temperature and melatonin. And those evening hours, you're getting ready to go to sleep, as your body temperature drops, melatonin rises. During the morning hours, when you're awakening, just the opposite occurs. The melatonin drops and your core body temperature starts to rise. So there are things that can adversely impact that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but understand that that's an inverse relationship. And I think you all know that melatonin has been used to help people with jet lag, and many physicians now, instead of using hypnotic drugs, will use melatonin to help people, get to sleep at night. But being able to do it more naturally through regulation of the light patterns can make a significant difference. Exposure to bright blue light suppresses suppresses that production. And, so often what we want to do, especially in people who may have behavioral issues in the evening, is look at ways that we can institute some bright light therapy in the morning to reduce some of that troublesome pattern of getting to sleep in the evening.
So, Kevin, I advanced the slide on you a little bit, but could you talk about, what most lighting you see in institutional settings like a senior living community is? It's the blue light, right? And what does that do? I mean, it's great in the morning,
yeah.
Right? But what happens when you're exposed to it all day?
Yeah, all day. It's going to affect your nighttime sleep pattern because, as we said before, the impact it has on suppressing that melatonin production. People are going to have problems in the evening. And there's a very common problem too, Jack, that people should be aware of. A very common problem in older adults is called the advanced sleep phase cycle. So what ends up happening?
Look at that.
What's that, Jack? Okay.
No, I said I'm just giving you that slide there.
Oh, very good. Okay, so this kind of talks about that particular subject. Older adults average only 60 minutes of bright light daily in their communities. And those with dementia living at home average only about 30 minutes. People with dementia who live in nursing homes average no significant bright light therapy, and only about 10 minutes that are greater than 1,000 lux, which is a measure of that light intensity. So this contributes to weakening of that sleep-wake cycle. So I'm sure many of you who work in senior living have noticed older adults who have frequent nocturnal awakenings. Their sleep is not consistent. They're sleepy during the day. It's not unusual to walk into senior living communities and find people asleep in their chairs during the daytime. And as I mentioned before, a common problem that we see is called this advanced sleep phase syndrome, in which people get sleepy in the early evening, they fall asleep, and then they're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that can be disruptive. And for folks with dementia who may have problems expressing and communicating, it can lead to agitation, even aggression.
So we've heard one of the leading researchers in the effect of light on sleep refer to light as a drug. Would you agree with that assessment, Kevin?
Absolutely. I often say that movement is medicine. In fact, there's a whole national initiative that's been endorsed by the American College of Sports Medicine, the American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, all the major professional organizations. It's called Exercise is Medicine. Well, I think we can say light is medicine too, because it does have a significant, profound effect on being able to address issues with behaviors, with mood. We know that adequate lighting can reduce fall risk. So, but it has to be the right dose at the right, the right type at the right time of day, just like any other medicine. We prescribe it at particular times for a particular reason. Some people may need to take a drug with food to minimize gastric irritation, or sometimes food can actually improve the absorption of a medication. So the same way, we want to kind of make sure it's appropriate for that particular person. We also like to, we can actually address that in their rooms. So we want to make sure that, if we're in a senior living setting, that everyone has exposure to bright light at certain times of the day, so minimize that problem with early drowsiness in the early evening.
Right. You can see from our slide here what happens, if you're a guy on the left, the guy on the left clearly isn't getting enough light at the right time of day, right, Kevin?
That's a perfect.
Guy on the right's ready. He looks like he's ready to go to Wall Street. So, all right. So given what sort of the research is and the science is, my partner Steve started having a conversation with Charlie Trusker, Kevin's CEO, about whether we could do this at a building level, right? I mean, we know about light boxes for people who have seasonal affective disorder, and that's kind of the idea of you're administering that light at an individual level. But what if you could do the same thing that your phone does, as Steve mentioned, your phone will shift from a day mode to a night mode. What if you could do the same thing for your building? So we went out and we started looking at various technologies, and we figured out that it was not only possible, but could be done, we thought, very cost effectively and in a way that is controlled remotely, so that it doesn't require a lot of intervention from the building staff. So back in January, we installed what we think is the first installation of a circadian lighting system at scale in a memory care building. This is an Affinity building called Glen Manor. It's in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, relatively close to the Affinity headquarters in Hickory. We installed 56 lights in the common area in the residence rooms, and we start changing those lights at 6 a.m. What happens in these light fixtures is they have two different color temperatures of light, and you can blend them in between and also change sort of the dimness level of that light. So what I'm going to do now is actually show you that system in operation. So this is the very early morning hours. This is the building starting to come to life. I'm going to show you a 24-hour cycle in about 60 seconds. So this is time-lapse video. As the morning starts to come up, you see the light has changed color now. It's turned to white light. This is about what you're going to see by breakfast time. It's going to stay at this bright white level with and the dimness being all the way up. As you start to get into the later in the afternoon, when you would expect sundown to happen, it's going to shift back like you're seeing on your screen, right? Eventually, it's going to go into what we call night mode, so that the hallways will be at a very low light level in the evening when people are asleep. Obviously, in the resident rooms, that's going to go completely dark, like you see on your screen now. But the hallways will continue to have some level of lighting, because obviously the staff needs to get around. So this is just an example of what the algorithm looks like. You can see there in this particular building, and I would just say that this building has, it's a rural building. It wakes up very early just because the residents historically woke up very early, kind of goes to bed early as well. So all of their schedule is adjusted accordingly. They eat breakfast early. In the early morning, when you're at night level, the color temperature, and color temperature is how we talk about what the warmth of the light is. So 2700 Kelvin is that very nice warm amber glow. And all the way up to 5700 Kelvin is bright daylight. So as you see, as we come up through the morning at 6:30, the dimness level is starting to come up. We're still at 2700 kelvins because it's meant to replicate the dawn, so sunrise. As we get closer to 7 o'clock, it's going to come up to sort of a mid warmth. And by the time we get to, I think, breakfast in this building, Kevin, is it around 7:30, something like that? They eat relatively early. And by the time they're done with breakfast, it's at full daylight brightness. The dim level is 100%. And that's the way it will stay until starting later in the afternoon. So the great thing about this is it's customizable. If Kevin, because we do this in consultation with you, the medical staff, the building staff, if you said we want this to start at 7 a.m., we could do that as well. Let's talk a little bit, Kevin, about so this was your first experiment. And, as Steve said, a lot of people have been talking about this, but everybody finds a reason not to do it because it's new and it's innovative and everybody's scared of change, right? Nobody wants to be the first. But you and Charlie Trefsker wanted to be the first. You dove into this, and tell us what it is that you hope to see.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like we were flying by the seat of our pants. It was, there is some research out there that supports its efficacy. And for our population, we do have in our assisted living population fairly high prevalence of cognitive impairment. People with mood disorders, either depression or chronic anxiety disorder, maybe behavioral issues related to agitation, aggressiveness. We definitely wanted to reduce the use of the antipsychotic drugs and also the anti-seizure drugs. I think many of you know that as the CMS has really tried to promote getting people off the antipsychotics, or at least reduction in the numbers, because they're being used off-label for agitation, aggression, and dementia, and they do have significant toxicities, much higher risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, and even death in people with dementia. Alternatively, some physicians have resorted to using benzodiazepines, which have their own toxicities, including fall risk. The anti-seizure drugs, I kind of kid my colleagues saying that the new vitamin D is Depakote, and again, Depakote is anti-seizure drug being used off-label, and it does have a heightened fall risk. The studies have shown that after a couple of weeks, it really doesn't do anything other than sedating that person, which obviously is not desirable, and they can have significant liver toxicities as well. So we wanted to look at non-pharmacologic interventions like this to see if it would have an impact on these key metrics on sleep, on mood, behavior, on the use of the psychotropics, and on falls. And happily, and again, this was not a research study. However, it was a definite quality improvement project. So we set clear goals. We actually developed a chart around this and the metrics we wanted to watch. And happily, we did see improvements in all these metrics.
Right. And so, Kevin, I think one of the key points here is that all of these things work together, right? People who sleep better, get more activity, that makes them more physically fit, which helps reduce falls. I know your CFO, Brian Starnes, told me that between the LED lighting we had done in lots of your other buildings and other measures that you were taking to address fall risk, that your rate of falls declined so much that your insurer called him and asked if the staff had stopped reporting falls, because those falls can be expensive, right? I mean, it's not just in terms of medical care, but a lot of times they can lead to lawsuits as well, and all of that is expensive. And obviously, it's not just about the money; it's about the person as well, because you want to keep them healthy and in your facility, right?
And as many of you who work in senior living know, falls are multifactorial. There may be intrinsic
absolutely.
specific, or there may be extrinsic factors. So, I mean, obviously we want them, because they're multifactorial, we want to use multi-component interventions, and adequate lighting obviously can have a significant impact. But as Jack mentioned, that, you know, the impact on these other areas, because we now know that depression is a risk factor for falls. And of course, these folks are on drug therapy for these things. Even the newer class of antidepressants have been shown to be associated with augmented fall risk. So, I mean, all these things, like most issues in geriatric care, everything's interrelated. So, absolutely.
So, then let's talk about what you've been seeing. And as you mentioned, you know, most of this is anecdotal evidence right now. I think we're in the process of getting actually doing the studies to try to demonstrate this on a longer time scale. But as you also mentioned, there's lots of evidence in other sectors that shows the efficacy. But what are you actually hearing from the staff and seeing with your own eyes?
Yeah, and our head of dementia programming has shared this with me, and I've seen it from talking with our staff myself, is that they've noticed better sleep patterns. There's less nocturnal awakenings, people getting up at night. There's been a decrease in sundowning in our dementia care units, which we're very happy about, less wandering at night. And happily, and this is not something we anticipated, the staff felt better. They felt they had more energy during the course of the day. You know, because as you know, a common problem, especially in climates where, you know, the days get shorter in winter, you know, there's that whole situation with seasonal affective disorder. So, you know, having enough adequate light during the daytime can have a positive impact on the staff. So we also noted that the families felt very good about it. So we got very positive feedback from them. And I think it did really significantly improve the energy level, not only of our staff, but of our residents. We noticed a, you know, increased participation in some of our fitness activities. So again, all these things are interrelated. So happily, very positive impact in many domains.
Yeah, and a great story that came out of Glen Manor is you had a resident there. We'll call her Miss P to protect her identity, and she was really kind of one of the live wires in your memory care unit. She had a real crush on our field crew leader, Ben, who you saw in the picture on Lumenant earlier, and she was a good handful, I guess you would say, but she was also a night wanderer, right? I mean, she got up every night and wandered around, and she couldn't sleep at night, and the staff would put her back to bed, and a lot of times that didn't take. Amazingly, once this system got installed and up and running, she started sleeping through the night. And unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but it's a real example of a concrete that this system made in the life of a resident. You know, and that's, at the end of the day, that's really what this is about. So as a result of what you're seeing already, your CEO, Charlie, has decided to go big. I know you're down in Charleston, South Carolina today, Kevin, for a big reception at your brand new flagship, Indigo Hall, which is a 160-bed community there. It's beautiful. I've been in it a number of times, and Charlie said we're going to put Circadian Lighting and the memory care unit here because this is the wave of the future. We've already seen enough in Glen Manor to know this is what we need to do. So it's not only in your flagship. He's told us to go do this in all of your new buildings, and in addition, he's asked us to go back and retrofit some of the memory care buildings that we had done with LED lighting as recently as a year ago. So he's really convinced that this is something that you need to do to provide a high level of care to your residents. So I think we've touched on some of these things. You know, if we know if we can get people to sleep better, the health benefits are going to be greater than just the improvement in falls you might see from a standard LED upgrade or and all of the other multifactorial things that you're doing to prevent falls. And then I guess, Kevin, maybe just talk about the fact that there's plenty of evidence, other scientific evidence about the impact of light on sleep that makes you comfortable in moving forward without necessarily having a senior living specific study, right?
Right. Yeah, and the research clearly has shown benefits. You know, with regard to mood, you know, it's somewhat mixed. Some studies have shown positive impact. Others, you know, perhaps not as robust. But you know, our experience has been so positive with regard to sleep and some of the behaviors that we've, you know, some of the challenging behaviors in people with dementia that you know, we've got enough evidence for our purposes to continue to move forward. And we're gonna actually be engaged in more research on this in collaboration with an academic partner.
Sure. And at the end of the slide deck, when you get it, we do cite to a number of these studies, both sort of focused at seniors and then more broadly at lighting and health. I think one of the things, real reasons to do that senior living specific study is that if you get a good study, Kevin, you might be able to get this to become a reimbursable medical expense under Medicare, and that would be tremendous, obviously. So one thing I want to point out is that Affinity is not the only company that has decided to put the circadian system in their building. So we just, in the last couple of weeks, have finished an installation at Frankia Seaside, which is in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. This is also a memory care retrofit. Their goal, like our mission is, was to improve the safety, aesthetics, and wellness of that side of the building. And they also know that they're in a very competitive market. Look, they got Indigo Hall opening up on the other side of town, and they gotta stay competitive, right? So Charleston is obviously a place where a lot of people want to retire, and they wanted to be out front of this trend as well. So what you can see here, and this really goes to, this is a before and after shot. This will just, if you don't think that better lighting can help with falls, look at this picture. On the left, you can see these big black holes, other sort of white lights. The walls are barely lit. And Kevin, I guess older eyes are going to see these kind of spots on the floor and think that there's actually a hole there, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a decrease in contrast sensitivity as we get older, and particularly in people with cognitive issues with dementia, you know, a very dark spot can be perceived as a hole, and they can be afraid of falling. So
anyway, so they're thrilled. You know, their facility already looks better, and they're really excited about what we've done for them. So let's talk just real quickly about some of the nuts and bolts of the system. Basically, you've got three basic components. You've got the LED light fixtures, which you've seen. As I mentioned, they've got two different color LEDs within them. There are lots of LEDs, but you've got the 2700K, the 5700K, and you can blend the lights to be so that you see that full spectrum of natural daylight. You have a system that controls it called Light Cloud. This again is where we really spend a lot of time looking at different systems. It's got wireless fixture by fixture control. Every single light fixture in the building is individually controllable. So if you want to have one room wake up at 6:30 and the next room wake up at 7, that's possible. All the lights connect and talk to each other. It connects over the cellular data network, so you never have to touch the Wi-Fi system in the building. and it comes with a 10-year warranty. The other piece of it is this control algorithm that we develop and program based on input from the medical staff and the building staff as to how they want things to work. So, so now, of course, there's the big question. How do you pay for it? So depending upon the cost of power that you're paying in your state or with your utility, we think there's a very good chance that the energy savings every 10 years can pay for it. The great thing is that we have the ability to finance these systems in-house through a creative model called Energy as a Service. And under that, it's very similar to software as a service. You know, you're just like having Microsoft Office and paying for it on a monthly or yearly basis. Essentially, we install in the fixtures years. We have the responsibility to maintain the system for the life of that 10-year term. And at the end of that term, we turn them over to you. And most LED light fixtures have at least a 15-year life expectancy. You have one set monthly payment, no matter how much energy you use. And the great thing that your CFO will love is that from an accounting perspective, it's considered an operating expense rather than a capital expense. So that's great from sort of from a lender's perspective. So just to sort of recap some of the points we've made, this we really feel like this is a major innovation in senior housing. We're already seeing improved health outcomes as a result of the initial project we've done with Affinity. We think this is a very cost-effective and scalable system, and we just want to, we welcome the opportunity to come look at one of your buildings, tell you how we can do the system there so we can help you be a leader in the field. All right, Steve, back to you. You're on mute, Steve.
Yes, I am. Okay, here we go. I got a ton of questions for you. First question is this.
All right.
We have couples, and they don't have the same light system, the same light needs or cycles. That's the word I'm looking for.
If they're a couple?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, Kevin, do you want to understand? I guess the way I would say is that I think most people have the same light needs. Now, if the question is, do they wake up at different times? Yeah, that's right.
Kevin?
But I think if the question is, can you have the room wake up at a different time? I think you would probably set it so that the couple, the half of the couple that likes to wake up later, you're have to default to that. I think the reality is that you're going to have one fixture in the room that is going to be programmed to a specific time. I'm not sure. I'm not sort of giving them separate bedrooms. I'm not sure we can do much there.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm thinking too. It's probably whoever's got the strongest influence in the family. But there aren't that many couples.
That's right. So you mean the wife, right, Steve?
That's right. So,
wife wins this battle.
And I'm just going to give a commentary. Was about some research study. We had a slide that we decided was too dense, but we'll make that available to you in the email. When you're trying to create, the next question is this: when you're designing for dimension, you're trying to create this home-like setting. How are you squaring that with sort of the extreme level, hospital level color temperatures?
Kevin, do you want to take that?
Let me understand the question, Steve. You mean if people are coming from the hospital to the
well, I think what they're asking is because during the day it is going to be bright and pretty light out. Does that feel clinical? I guess is that the question, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's probably a better description.
Yeah. Well, what we have found and the research has demonstrated is that at least an hour of bright light in the morning, can have a significant favorable impact on some of that evening agitation, aggression, especially in people with dementia. So I've not had anybody, as far as I know, and Julie, our dementia care programmer, hasn't said to me that anyone has suggested that it looked clinical at all. I think I walked into this building today, and it has this lighting. It was very positive coming in, and it's kind of uplifting to see nature.
The really amazing thing here, Steve, and this was actually counterintuitive when we first got the system up and running, is that the closer you got to that full daylight brightness,
yep,
the glare in the building actually went down, because what happened is that the light inside the building was perfectly matched to the light outside the building, and you didn't have this differentiation, which is what leads to glare. So it actually, it's weird to say, because you're at 100% dimness level and 5,700 Kelvin, and it's actually easier on your eyes than just being in a super brightly lit hallway because of that fact. I can't even explain it, but that's how it is.
Okay, perfect. So next question is this. You talk about staff feeling more energetic. Does that include night staff? Or which is kind of a good question, right? Because you've got the really dim hall, so it would seem like it might go the other way for staff.
No, this is the daytime staff. As far as the night staff is concerned, I think the fact that they're not running around, dealing with people getting up and wandering, and the nocturnal awakenings and so forth. I mean, they felt that we got positive feedback from them, but really didn't get much feedback on their specific energy levels. We did get it from the daytime staff, but I think just not having the aggravation of dealing with some of the behaviors at night has made a difference for them as well.
Yeah, the other thing to note is that the staff areas of the building, we do not dim down. We keep those at a more of a daylight setting, so that where they're sitting, they're having more energizing light.
Perfect. Are there what happens if I mean, I know that they're wonderful systems and all, but after you install them, if they break down, how do you get it repaired? The person asking this says, we installed a fancy lighting system, and if a module goes down, it takes 3 weeks to get repaired, and that's obviously a problem.
Well, as I mentioned, so if you work with us on our energy as a service model, we have the obligation to service those lights, and we keep a lot of this in stock. We can have people on the ground within, I would say, 48 hours from the time you're actually having, depending upon how far you are away. I think in the case of the Southeast, where we're located, we would have somebody there in 24 hours to be able to solve the problem. And the expense, everything is on us. So, like I said, the system's going to be warranted for 10 years, and we will deal with all the maintenance.
Yeah, the person particularly asking this in this case is actually on the West Coast, and so that sort of becomes, what do I do if you're across the country?
We're putting somebody on a plane and getting them to you. Although I think we are looking to, we are growing rapidly and looking, I think in the near future we will have crews or affiliates who will be on the West Coast. Perfect. And able to respond within 24 hours.
Okay. What's involved in, next question, what's involved in retrofitting an existing community, say, that's built as a memory care, say in the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. If you have a drop ceiling it's a very quick install. In most of the Affinity buildings, and Affinity tends to have smaller buildings that are, say, 60, 70 units, something like that. We can get that installation done in under a week, or just about a week. The Indigo Hall, because it's a bigger building, that took a couple of weeks, but our crews have become incredibly efficient at doing these retrofits, both in drop ceilings and in hard ceilings as well. So typically they're going out on Monday, getting the building done, coming back Friday.
Perfect. What's the difference between actual sunlight and manufactured lighting that tries to emulate natural light? Kevin, maybe?
Kevin, you want to address that? Yeah, that's a. I'm going to kick the science questions to Kevin. Lawyers, we don't know anything about anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you know, Steve, certain light intensity will stimulate. When it hits the retina, it actually will send a message to the area in the anterior hypothalamus of the brain. So your brain is really regulating your circadian rhythms, and that is what how melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. So you want to make sure that the light intensity in the morning is pretty close. If people were able to go out and spend an hour in bright sun during the morning hours, that could be significantly a benefit. But I think we know in many senior living communities that doesn't happen, and especially in those winter months when that could be even more of an issue. In memory care, it's even more significant. So I think what you want to do is make sure the light intensity is enough to trigger that neurophysiologic response.
So Kevin, this is a good time for you to talk about that Zimmerman study where they exposed, I think it was dementia patients to, they used a light box, correct?
Yeah, and it was at least 2,000 lux, and if they were exposed to that for an hour, it reduced significantly the sundowning, the evening agitation, aggression that we often see. So,
right.
And there had been.
That was artificial light, right? I mean, it wasn't like they took those folks outside. Yeah. So,
yeah.
I think for what the question is asking, do you also get that benefit from artificial light as well as from natural daylight?
It has to be adequate intensity naturally.
Yeah.
So next question is this. So we've mostly been talking, I think, about using circadian lighting in memory care. What about independent living, personal care, or assisted living?
Well, I'm pretty sure, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Charlie is wanting to start doing this in assisted living as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're in assisted living or independent living, you have more ability to get outside typically than in memory care. We have tended to think that you'll probably see the greatest impact for folks who are confined indoors and don't get any exposure to natural light. But look, those of us who work in office buildings, I want this in my house, honestly, because my wife keeps saying, when are you going to do this at home? Because, too much bright light in the evening disrupts everybody. So I think it can make sense in any senior living application.
Yeah, in this building that I'm in right now, Steve, Indigo Hall, we actually have that system installed. And this is, although we have a memory care unit, the major number of residents are in the assisted living. But, folks who are in the senior living world know that in assisted living, probably the majority of their residents have some degree of cognitive impairment, and then we get concerned. One of the things that we do routinely now is doing a wandering assessment, because elopement risks can be pretty significant too if people get out and don't really know where they are or where they're going. So we're very aware of that and try to assess that for all of our residents coming in. But yeah, so we are, going full bore. We're actually implementing this in our new builds for all of our assisted living residences, not just dementia care.
Yep. Let me see, what else do I have here? So we had a question about the cost of cost differentiation between a standard lighting program versus this. And if you allow me, I'm just gonna sort of do a quick tackle on this. As we talked about this, it's kind of like anything else. There have been cases, we talked about one case where by doing the circadian lighting, what they're doing here actually took the cost down. There have been other cases where the cost has gone up, where it's at increased the cost. And so it's hard to answer because it could be any place depending on what the particular specifics are of the community.
Yeah, that's right. We really need to come in and assess what you want to do to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, the next question I do have, I think this is a great question, is does this drive the interior designers crazy because as they look to select colors and fabrics with all these different light ranges?
Oh, in terms of the colors and fabric, I don't know.
That's a great question.
I mean, they do ask for sometimes more interesting architectural lighting options, and that is something I'm happy to say we will have online in the next 6 months or so. With our major supplier, we had to kind of demonstrate to them that there was going to be a market, and we've already, because of the work with Affinity, have enough projects ordered that they're providing us with additional types of fixtures that are going to make the interior designers happy. In terms of the color, man, that's way above my pay grade. So,
yeah. I mean, I think it'll probably be. It's one of those things. It's actually a pretty interesting question. Is it well listed? Is it a well listed product? And I'm going to actually read this because I'm not sure I understand the question. Is it a well-listed product, and how does it rate on the Mellon Optics Lux model? Don't know, have to get back to you on that. And how about working in Canada?
Could we work in Canada? That's a good question. Here's the thing, we'll figure out a way. I haven't had to answer that, but it's a good test. It'll put my legal skills to a good test.
Perfect. And I think I have hit all. Let me see. I think.
Hey, Steve,
a couple other technical
one thing.
Questions. Kevin, go.
Yeah, one thing we had kind of bantered around is Jack. Just so everyone knows, what happens in an emergency. Like in the evening, for example. What happens in emergency in terms of overriding the system.
Yeah. So we do have the ability. The system can be brought to full brightness quickly. The other interesting thing sort of on that point is that if somebody wants to go take a nap, they have the ability to turn off the light in their room until the next part of the algorithm kicks in. So if somebody needs to take a nap for an hour or two, they can do that so that they're not going to be blinded by the daylight brightness of the light.
And hopefully that daytime napping will decrease because
well, that's right.
That's a good thing. We've seen that happen.
Yeah.
So one other question: does it help with elopement? Kevin?
Well, I can tell you, Steve, in the communities where we've implemented it now, we haven't had that problem. Of course, thankfully, we try to do everything we can to assess people for their wandering and elopement risk when they come in. So I think it's probably, we'll have to look at it a longer period of time, but I think that's a great question, is to see the impact it has. But my suspicion is over time, by impacting that wandering issue. Hopefully it'll have a benefit that way.
Perfect.
But it's probably too early to tell.
Great. So that comes to the end of my questions, Jack and Kevin, and I think we're about out of time. We will send out a bunch of additional information. If you're interested in getting more information sort of proactively, you can go to seniorlivingforesight.net/Lumenant webinar and fill out a form, and we will get some more information to you. Number of questions we've had here, so we'll get some additional responses out. This has been really cool, Kevin and Jack. I appreciate it a bunch, and I can hardly wait, Kevin, to get to one of your communities. I'm actually going to be on that side of the country in a few weeks, and I'm going to love to come and visit one and check it out for myself.
Excellent. We'll look forward to welcoming you, Steve. Thank you.
Are there any buildings on the West Coast? Actually,
Thanks,
I meant to ask this. Somebody had asked this. Are there buildings on the West Coast that have installations?
Not yet. Like I said, primarily it's just the Southeast so far, but we would love to do a building on the West Coast. So call us up.
Right. Could you do this in a small residential home? Is it would be cost effective?
You could. I mean, it would. It's going to cost more at a small scale, but I still think, for me, I'd love to have it in my home. So it would be worth it to me to do it.
Me too. Well, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it a bunch, and very informative. And we will have everybody will have the links out and some additional information. So I appreciate your attending today.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.